A trainer sees a skinny black client as an easy target for ridicule and humiliation. He mocks him, pours protein on his head, and openly ridicules his appearance. But what the trainer doesn't know yet is that he is facing a real fitness club owner who puts up with all this for one moment, the moment when the truth comes out. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new stories, and write in the comments where you're watching us from. Jason Carter adjusted his simple, loose workout shirt and glanced at himself in the rearview mirror. He looked nothing like the billionaire CEO of one of the city's most exclusive fitness clubs, and that was the point. Today, he wasn't here as Jason Carter, the renowned businessman. He was here as a regular client, signed up under a false name, prepared to go through a day of training at his club with the bare minimum membership package. The idea had come to him after receiving an increasing number of complaints from clients who felt disrespected or ignored by the staff. Jason had built his business with a vision of inclusivity and respect for everyone, regardless of background, status, or appearance. The complaints made him uneasy, even though his management team assured him that these were isolated incidents quickly dealt with. But Jason's instincts told him something more was happening, something he needed to see for himself. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of his car, crossed the busy parking lot, and entered the large glass doors of the club. Normally, he'd be greeted by a line of welcoming staff members who knew him by name. Today, he kept his head down, taking in every detail. The smell of polished wood and fresh lemon disinfectant filled the lobby, and the gleaming lights reflected off the sleek, modern decor he'd personally approved during the club's design phase. A young man stood behind the reception desk, distracted, laughing with a colleague. Jason waited a moment before clearing his throat softly to get their attention. Without looking up, the receptionist gave him a cursory wave toward the back of the club, barely acknowledging his presence. Jason felt a small pang of irritation. He was used to being treated with respect, not as someone invisible. But he swallowed his pride, reminding himself of his mission. This was about experiencing the club as a regular customer, an ordinary man looking for a place to work out, not the CEO who'd built the place. "Excuse me," Jason said, doing his best to keep his tone neutral. "I'd like some assistance finding the locker room." The receptionist finally glanced up, giving Jason an indifferent look. "Down that hall and to the left," he said dismissively, returning his attention to his colleague. Jason nodded politely and turned away, taking in his surroundings as he walked toward the locker rooms. He noticed other staff members lounging near the entrance, some absorbed in their phones, while others exchanged jokes with each other. Not one of them made an effort to greet him, let alone offer any assistance. Jason's gut tightened. He'd designed this club to be a warm, welcoming space for everyone, but the staff's behavior so far showed anything but that. As he approached the locker room, he overheard two clients speaking nearby, both dressed in well-worn workout clothes. They were discussing the lack of attention from the trainers and how they felt unimportant compared to VIP clients. Jason slowed his pace, straining to hear more. Their words confirmed his worst fears, that his staff might have cultivated a culture of favoritism, where only the most exclusive members received top-tier treatment. Inside the locker room, Jason found a modest area with rows of metal lockers and a bench running down the center. He ran his fingers along one of the lockers, noting a small layer of dust that would never have been tolerated in the VIP section. Glancing around, he observed scuffed floors and walls that hadn't been freshly painted in some time. Everything seemed a little run down, a stark contrast to the pristine VIP section he'd come to know. Jason took a deep breath and pushed open the door to the main workout area. He scanned the room, eyes tracing the familiar state-of-the-art machines, the weights lined up in perfect rows, and the floor-to-ceiling windows that let in natural light. It was exactly as he'd designed it. Clean, modern, and inviting. But today, there was no team of trainers coming over to greet him, no staff asking if he needed assistance. Instead, he noticed a few sidelong glances from trainers who quickly looked away, uninterested. Jason spotted an open bench near the center of the room and made his way over, setting his bag down and beginning a light warm-up. He was just a few stretches in when he noticed a large, muscular man with a shaved head and intense gaze heading his way. Jason recognized him instantly. Dave, one of the club's senior trainers. Jason had hired Dave years ago, impressed by his fitness knowledge and dedication. But now, seeing Dave approach him with a smirk, Jason braced himself. "Hey, new guy," Dave said, his voice dripping with mock friendliness. "You're looking a little underdeveloped. Are you sure you can handle this gym?" Jason kept his expression neutral and nodded. "I think I'll be okay. Just here to get a workout in." Dave's smirk widened. All right. But listen, man, at this club, we like to keep things high performance. Maybe I can help you bulk up a bit." He walked over to the weight rack, grabbed a heavy dumbbell, and tossed it at Jason without warning. Jason managed to catch it, but just barely. His muscles strained under the unexpected weight, and he felt the smirks of the trainers around him. They weren't used to seeing him like this, a regular guy just trying to fit in. "See, you're a little shaky," Dave commented, shaking his head in exaggerated disappointment. "We're gonna need to get you on some serious protein, buddy. Maybe even some extra enhancements," he added with a wink, laughing as he nudged another trainer who had joined to watch. Jason took a steadying breath, reminding himself to stay calm and focused. He was here to observe, not to react. But Dave's next move caught him completely off guard. "Actually," Dave continued, reaching into his gym bag, "I've got some protein powder right here." He held up a large container with a grin that was anything but friendly. "Let's see if you can handle it." Before Jason could respond, Dave twisted the cap off, leaned in close, and dumped a portion of the powder directly over Jason's head. The fine white powder settled over his hair and shoulders, coating him like a layer of dust. Jason froze, feeling the humiliation seep into his skin as laughter broke out around him. Dave grinned, looking around at the others as if expecting applause. "There you go, man," he said, patting Jason's shoulder in mock encouragement. "Now you look like you might actually gain some muscle." Jason wiped some of the powder off his face, trying to maintain his composure. He wanted nothing more than to call Dave out, to tell him exactly who he was talking to. But he held back, reminding himself of his goal. If this was how they treated a nobody, he needed to witness the full extent of it. As he continued his workout, the taunts kept coming. Every time he moved to a different machine, Dave seemed to appear, making another snide comment or critique. At one point, he even suggested that Jason find a different gym if he wasn't willing to step up his game. Jason watched how other trainers interacted with clients. Every time a VIP client entered, the staff's demeanor changed immediately. They were all smiles, attentive, quick to offer assistance and praise. But when it came to ordinary members, the trainers barely spared them a glance, treating them like second-class citizens. Jason felt a deep sense of betrayal building within him. This wasn't the club he'd built, and it wasn't the culture he'd worked so hard to instill. By the end of his workout, Jason was physically and mentally exhausted. He'd never felt so disrespected, so invisible in a place that bore his own name. As he left the gym floor, he shot one last look at Dave, who was chatting and laughing with another trainer, seemingly oblivious to the impact his actions had had. Jason left, his mind racing. He knew now that this was more than a few isolated incidents. The disrespect and disregard had become ingrained in the club's culture, and it was something he would not tolerate. The following day, Jason returned to the gym determined to see how far the disrespect would go. If he was going to make lasting changes in his club, he needed to understand the full extent of the problem. He entered the gym under the same low-tier membership, his identity still hidden behind an alias. As he walked through the club's glass doors, he noticed the same apathetic glances from staff, who were either lost in conversation or scrolling through their phones. His entrance caused no stir, no welcome. He was invisible to them. He was just finishing his warm-up when he noticed Dave approaching him, an unmistakable smirk on his face. Jason braced himself, preparing for what felt like an inevitable confrontation. "Back again?" Dave sneered, folding his arms across his chest. "Didn't think you'd last this long." Jason kept his voice even. "Just here to get a workout in." Dave rolled his eyes. "Right. Well, if you're serious about building muscle, you're going to need more than just those puny weights you're struggling with." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "In fact, I've got something that might really help you bulk up." Jason tensed as he saw Dave produce a syringe from his pocket, holding it up with a dark, mocking grin. "Ever tried a little extra boost? It'll make you feel like a real athlete." His tone was laced with sarcasm, and Jason felt a chill creep down his spine. It was one thing to suggest protein powder, it was another to mockingly suggest steroids. "No, thanks," Jason replied firmly, fighting to keep his tone steady. He knew Dave was just trying to get a reaction, but the lengths he was going to were both infuriating and disturbing. Dave shrugged, shaking the syringe for emphasis before pocketing it again. "Your loss," he said with a chuckle. "Just don't expect any results without the right help." Jason tried to focus on his exercises, moving from one station to another. But Dave wouldn't leave him alone. As Jason lay back on a bench to lift weights, Dave sauntered over with another trainer, leaning casually against the equipment and openly watching him struggle under the heavy load. "Careful there, buddy," Dave called out, his voice tinged with mock concern. "Those weights might be a little too much for you." Just as Jason was about to complete a rep, Dave moved forward and, accidentally, let his hand slip over the barbell, causing Jason to lose his grip and nearly drop the weight. Jason barely managed to catch it, his arms straining with the sudden imbalance. He set the weights down with a clank, breathing heavily, his patience wearing thin. "Whoa, whoa," Dave laughed, holding up his hands in mock apology. "Didn't mean to make you slip, little guy. Maybe you should stick to something lighter." Jason's hands clenched into fists as he sat up, trying to mask his frustration. He had never felt so belittled in his life, especially not in his own club. But he wasn't ready to break cover yet. He needed to keep going to see just how deep this culture of disrespect ran. Ignoring Dave, he moved over to the squat rack, hoping for some peace. But Dave followed him, smirking. "You really don't give up, do you?" he said with a laugh. "All right, let's make it a real test then." Jason positioned himself under the barbell, preparing to lift, but as he went down into a squat, he felt the bar suddenly grow heavier. Glancing to his left, he saw that Dave had placed an extra weight on one side without him noticing. The imbalance threw him off, and he barely managed to stabilize the bar, his muscles screaming in protest. "What the hell are you doing?" Jason finally snapped, unable to contain his frustration any longer. Dave's smile only widened. "Just testing your strength, man. Thought you could use a little extra challenge." Jason took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. He couldn't let Dave know who he was. Not yet. He had to see this through, even if it meant enduring these humiliations. As he moved to the free weights section, Dave called out loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Hey, better watch out, everyone. We've got a real bodybuilder over here." Laughter rippled through the area, and Jason could feel the heat rise in his face. He was humiliated, but he reminded himself of his purpose. This was his chance to see what his clients went through, and the behavior he was witnessing was unacceptable. By the time he finished his workout, Jason felt exhausted, not from the exercises, but from the constant barrage of insults and disrespect. He gathered his things, glancing around the room. No one seemed to care about the way Dave had treated him. If anything, the other trainers seemed to approve, their faces showing amusement or indifference. As he left the gym that day, Jason's mind was racing. He'd seen enough. The culture of his club was nothing like he'd envisioned, and the employees he trusted had created a toxic environment where respect was conditional, reserved only for those deemed worthy. He would be back tomorrow, but this time, he wouldn't be hiding who he was. Jason arrived at the club the next day, but this time there was no disguise, no pretense of anonymity. He wore his usual business attire, exuding an air of authority and professionalism that couldn't be mistaken. Today, he was here as Jason Carter, owner and CEO, ready to confront the reality of his employees' behavior head-on. The time for silent observation was over. As he entered the club, heads turned. The staff members who had barely glanced at him the previous days now scrambled to greet him with welcoming smiles and respectful nods. Jason felt a wave of irritation, but he remained composed. He was determined to make sure they understood the consequences of their actions. He approached the front desk where the receptionist who had ignored him before now looked visibly nervous. Jason's presence clearly unsettled him, and the young man stammered a greeting, his face pale. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. I didn't realize you'd be visiting today," he said, forcing a smile. Jason merely nodded, his expression impassive. "Gather all the trainers and staff members in the main conference room. I'll be addressing everyone shortly," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The receptionist nodded quickly and hurried off to relay the message, his demeanor drastically different from when Jason had first encountered him as a low-tier member. Jason felt a mix of anger and disappointment. This double standard in behavior toward clients was exactly what he needed to address. Within minutes, the staff assembled in the conference room, whispering among themselves, exchanging confused and uneasy glances. Jason entered the room, his eyes scanning the faces before him. He noticed Dave standing in the back, arms folded and a look of mild annoyance on his face, clearly unaware of what was about to unfold. The other trainers who had laughed along with Dave during his antics shifted uncomfortably under Jason's steady gaze. Jason stepped to the front of the room, the weight of his presence silencing the whispers. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice calm but carrying a firm edge. "As most of you know, I've been the owner of this club for several years now. I built it with the vision of creating a space where every client, regardless of their status or appearance, feels valued, respected, and supported. But over the past few days, I've seen behavior that goes against everything I stand for." His words hung in the air, a tense silence filling the room. Jason looked directly at Dave, who still appeared oblivious, his smirk fading as he sensed the gravity of the situation. Over the last few days, Jason continued, I visited this club under an alias, posing as a standard member with no special status. I wanted to experience firsthand what many of our clients go through, and what I witnessed was nothing short of appalling. Murmurs spread through the room as realization dawned on some of the staff. Dave's expression changed from mild annoyance to shock, his arms dropping to his sides as he shifted uncomfortably. I was ignored, insulted, and humiliated, Jason said, his tone hardening. I was treated as less than human because I wasn't seen as a VIP. I was taunted, mocked, and disrespected by the very people who should have been there to support me. And the worst part? Many of you stood by and did nothing. You laughed, you encouraged, and you let this kind of behavior go unchecked. Jason's eyes landed on each staff member, watching as shame filled their faces. The weight of their actions now apparent, they avoided his gaze, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Dave finally spoke up, his voice wavering. Mr. Carter, if I had known— Jason cut him off, his voice sharp. It shouldn't matter who I am. Every client deserves respect, whether they're a VIP or someone on a basic membership. I expect every employee here to treat all clients with the same level of care and professionalism. And yet, you chose to single me out, to humiliate me, simply because I appeared to be someone who didn't deserve your respect. The room was silent, and Jason could feel the tension hanging thick in the air. He took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. Dave, he said, turning his attention fully to the trainer who had led the taunts, you were the worst offender. You didn't just ignore me. You went out of your way to humiliate and degrade me. You mocked my appearance, my physique, and even suggested using steroids. You dumped protein powder on my head, knowing I had no way of stopping you without revealing myself. I watched you treat VIP clients with smiles and respect, while you treated others as if they were beneath you. Dave swallowed, his face pale. Mr. Carter, I thought— Jason's voice remained cold and steady. You thought I was just another client you could push around. You thought my appearance and membership status made me less deserving of respect. And that attitude is precisely why you no longer have a place in my company. Effective immediately, you're fired. A ripple of shock went through the room. Dave opened his mouth as if to protest, but Jason held up a hand, silencing him. There's nothing you can say to justify your actions, Jason continued. You had every opportunity to do your job with respect and integrity, and instead you chose to bully and belittle. I will not tolerate that kind of behavior in my club. Jason looked around at the other trainers and staff members. For those of you who stood by and encouraged this behavior, consider this a final warning. If I ever witness or hear of anything like this happening again, you'll face the same consequences. This club was built on principles of inclusivity and respect, and I will do everything in my power to make sure those values are upheld. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. The staff members shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, others avoiding his gaze. I expect each of you to reflect on what's happened here, Jason said, his tone softening slightly. I want you to understand the importance of treating every client with respect, regardless of their background, status, or appearance. This club is a place where people come to improve themselves, to feel supported and encouraged. It's up to you to create that environment. With that, Jason turned and walked toward the door, leaving the staff in stunned silence. But before he exited, he looked back, his gaze hard. Remember, he said, this is your last chance. Make it count. As Jason left the conference room, he felt a sense of relief mixed with a renewed determination. The club he'd envisioned was worth fighting for, and he was ready to rebuild it from the ground up if necessary. His experience over the past few days had been painful, but it had also given him clarity. He knew what needed to be done, and he was willing to take every necessary step to restore the club's culture of respect and inclusivity. Outside the conference room, Jason called his assistant, instructing her to begin a full review of staff training procedures. He wanted to implement a comprehensive program focused on respectful and equal treatment for all clients. There would be new policies, strict consequences, and frequent evaluations to ensure that the toxic behavior he'd witnessed would not be allowed to take root again. As he left the club that day, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey had been painful, but it had reminded him of the principles he'd built his business on. From that moment forward, he was determined to make sure his club was a place where every client felt valued and respected, a place where discrimination had no room to grow. This was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes. Leave a comment to share your opinion and click the bell to stay up to date with new videos. In the meantime, skip to the next video and discover even more interesting stories.